Okay, so the first book I would like to start with is called Father to Nobody's Children. My mother read this to me when I was young, and it made a deep impression upon me, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. So, without any further ado, um, Father to Nobody's Children by David E. Fessenden. Chapter 1. Sir, may I stay? That's the chapter title. The young man was just ending a full day following his studies at medical school. He had conducted evening classes in reading, writing, arithmetic, and Bible for poor boys in the slums of London. Now the last class of the evening was over. All the young scholars had gone, and he began to close up shop, not at all aware that he was about to have an encounter that would change his life. His name was Thomas J. Bernardo, and he was studying to become a medical missionary to China. When he wasn't hitting the books, he could be found preaching in the street or teaching in a small ragged school, so called because of the condition of the clothes of the poor boys who attended there. This particular night he was closing up the school he and his friends had started in an old donkey shed. It wasn't as bad as it sounds. After they had laid down some wooden planks over the dirt floor and whitewashed the walls, it was not too bad. It was certainly no worse than many of the homes these boys lived in, here in the East End of London. It was time to put out the fire in the hearth, but as he turned toward the fireplace, he noticed a little figure standing there, staring into the flames. Not all the scholars were gone after all. But this boy could hardly be called a scholar. The young medical student recognized him as the quiet little lad who had sneaked in late and paid little attention to the lesson. He had probably come in just to get out of the cold. "Come, my lad, it's time to go home now," said Bernardo. "You're lucky I noticed you. I almost closed up the school for the night and left you locked in here." "That would suit me just fine, sir," the child said eagerly. "Whatever do you mean? If you were locked in here all night, your mother would be worried sick about you." "Ain't got no mother, sir." "No mother? Well, your father then. Now run along home." "Ain't got no father, sir, and I ain't got no home to go to." By now the young man was growing impatient. "Enough of this now. Get along to your friends, or wherever you live." "I ain't got no friends, sir, and I told you I don't live nowhere." The boy stuck a defiant, dirty chin up in the air. Now the young medical student was even more puzzled. Was this boy pulling his leg? Could there really be a child in this modern year of 1866 with no place to stay? "Come over here, lad," Bernardo said gently, and as the child shuffled over to him weakly, any doubts he had as to the truth of the story faded away. The boy was dressed in rags that could hardly have kept him warm on such a cold night. He was frighteningly thin and covered with dirt. Bernardo had worked for a while in the slums, and he thought he had seen poverty, but this child was without shirt, shoes, or socks in the middle of winter. "How old are you, son?" Bernardo said after a long time. "10, sir," he replied. He was small for his age, but his face looked older. His eyes had the hard, tired look of a suffering old man. His sad face and the painful tone in his voice had a ring of truth in them. "Do you mean to tell me, child," Bernardo asked again, "that you have no home, no father or mother or friends?" "That's right, sir. I'm not lying." "Then where did you sleep last night?" "In a hay wagon down at the market. Then today I met another boy who told me I could come here to get warm. He said you might let me stay by the fire all night. Oh, please, sir, may I stay? I won't do no harm." It was a cold winter night, with a raw wind that seemed to blow right through you, and a horrible thought sprang to Bernardo's mind. Is it possible that there are other children in the city of London like this boy, cold, hungry, homeless? The boy was awaiting his decision. "Tell me, lad," he said hesitantly, "are there other boys like you in London, without a home or family?" The boy smiled grimly and looked at Bernardo the way a child does when an adult asks a stupid question. "Course, sir, heaps of 'em, more'n I could count." This was too much for Bernardo. Surely the boy was lying. But then he had an idea. "My lad," he said, "if I were to give you something to eat and a place to sleep, would you take me to where some of these homeless boys sleep? Would you show me their hiding places?" The child's eyes lit up like a hungry wolf, and he eagerly nodded his head. As the pair walked to the medical student's apartment, around the corner from the London hospital, the child was as quiet as a mouse. All Bernardo heard out of him was the soft padding of his bare feet on the pavement. He walked along with his ragged clothes wrapped tightly around him in a vain attempt to keep out the biting wind. Once again Bernardo thought back on the boy's incredible story. Homeless boys sleeping outside in the dead of winter. More than he could count. Impossible. Yet in the back of his mind an insistent voice kept asking, "Suppose, after all, he speaks the truth." Upon reaching his home, Bernardo wasted no time. He placed the boy at his table and quickly supplied him with food and a hot drink. It was amazing how quickly he ate. At least that part of his story was no lie, and the meal did wonders for him. In a decidedly stronger voice he told his story. "My name's Jim," he said between mouthfuls. "Jim Jarvis. Never knew my father, and mother was always sick. When I was just a little kid, she went into the hospital, and I was sent to a poor boys' school. After mother died, I runned away." "How long ago was that?" "Don't exactly know, sir, but it was more than 5 years ago." "Where did you go then?" "There was an old lady down near Wapping that knowed my mother. She let me sleep in a shed out back. She was very kind to me. After that, I did odd jobs on a barge for a man they called Swearin' Dick. He treated me very bad, sir. He used to knock me around when I didn't have done nothing, and sometimes he wouldn't give me anything to eat. Sometimes he'd go away for days and leave me by myself on the boat." "Well," Bernardo asked, "why didn't you run away?" "I thought about it many a time," Jim replied, and some of his sad expression returned to his now happy face. "But Dick swore he'd kill me if I did. He had a big, mean dog, and he made it smell me. And he told me if I ever tried to leave the barge, he'd send the dog after me. Sometimes, when he's drunk, he'd sick the dog on me just for fun. Look here, sir, at what he did to me once." And he pulled aside his rags to reveal a long scar that ran down his leg. "How did you get away?" Bernardo asked. "Well, one day, when Dick was away, a man stopped by the boat and said Dick wasn't coming back. He joined the army when he was drunk. So I said, 'Mister, can you hold that dog for a minute?' And when he went down the hatchway with the dog, I shut the hatch on 'em both and run away as fast as I could." In spite of himself, the medical student couldn't hold back a smile at the thought of Jim's quick-thinking escape. Jim Jarvis told how he had been doing well, getting some odd jobs and begging a penny now and then. "But since the cold came on, I ain't had no luck at all. I've been sleeping out hungry most every night." "Well, Jim, if you're willing, I could find you a home where you could have plenty to eat and drink, good friends to take care of you, and even a chance to go to school." "That'd suit me just fine, sir." "Then we'll see about that tomorrow. But first, there is one more thing I want to ask you. Have you ever heard of another world where there is no hunger and cold, where children will never be beaten or treated badly?" "You mean heaven, sir?" "That's right, heaven." Bernardo smiled. "It's a wonderful place. But to go there, you must know Jesus. Do you know him, Jim?" "Yes," he said eagerly. "I know who he is. He's the Pope." Bernardo looked at him with astonishment. "Who told you that, Jim?" "No one, sir, but I knows I'm right. he said with a nod, because when my mother used to talk about the Pope, she'd do this. And he made the sign of the cross across his chest. And later, when she was dying, a man in black came and talked to her about Jesus, and they both did the same thing. So when your mother made the same sign with her fingers when she spoke about Jesus and the Pope, you figured they were the same person, eh? That's it, sir, he smiled, quite pleased with himself. Jim, I'm afraid you're mistaken, Bernardo said. Let me tell you the real story of Jesus. And he proceeded to explain how Christ came to earth as a baby in Bethlehem, of his goodness and kindness toward everyone, of his love for children. Jim was fascinated. This was all new to him. Throughout the story, he asked many questions which the medical student tried his best to answer. Because of Jim's limited education and experience, Bernardo had to explain some of the simplest details. But it was evident that poor Jim understood, and when he heard about Christ's death on the cross, he broke down in tears. "Oh, sir," he cried, "that's worse than anything Swearing Dick ever did to me." It was obvious that through Bernardo's simple words, little Jim had grown to love this Jesus, and now he was dead. "But wait, Jim, the story doesn't end there," Bernardo added, and he told how Christ rose from the dead and lives forever in heaven. Then he knelt and prayed that the Lord would bless young Jim. It was after midnight when the pair set off in search of the homeless boys. This time Jim confidently held Bernardo's hand. After crossing several main streets, Jim led his companion through a maze of back alleys. They passed small, dingy storefronts, locked, shuttered, and silent. Finally, they came to a shabby old shed where used clothing was sold. This was a bustling place of business in the daytime, but tonight everything was empty and still. They entered the shed and began a search, but it was soon obvious it was deserted. "Never mind, sir, they aren't here," Jim said at last, and for a moment Bernardo thought he might confess that it was all a hoax. "They don't dare lay about here, or the police would catch 'em. Once when I was green, I slept round here, but I nearly got nabbed, so I don't do that no more." He led Bernardo through the shed and back into the alley, which ended at a brick wall, the side of a building. Jim put his finger to his lips. "Shh! In a minute we'll see lots of 'em, sir, if we don't wake 'em up." "But, Jim," Bernardo whispered, "where are they?" "Up there," Jim replied, and before Bernardo could ask what he meant, Jim scrambled up the side of the wall like a monkey. Then he held down a stick for Bernardo to grasp, and the medical student managed, after some time, to hoist himself up so he could peer over the edge of the rooftop. Spread out on the flat roof lay 11 boys, some curled up by themselves, others huddled together for warmth. They had nothing to cover them, and their clothes were, if possible, in even worse condition than Jim's. One was older, probably about 18. The rest varied in age from maybe 9 to 14. At that moment the full moon came out from behind a cloud, shining on the faces of the sleeping boys. To Bernardo, it was as if God had pulled aside a curtain and showed him a dreadful secret. These poor children were absolutely homeless and destitute, and surely they were just a handful of many others who were cold and alone, with no place to live. Bernardo had worked for a while among the poor in London, and he knew of many children who lived in tiny dingy rooms and had little to eat. But the depth of poverty that he saw that night was totally unknown to him, and even now he almost doubted what he beheld with his own eyes. "Shall I wake 'em, sir?" Bernardo had been lost in thought, and Jim's question startled him. He looked on the child's face and saw no trace of the shock and pain that he himself felt. Scenes such as this were commonplace for the boy. "No, don't wake them," Bernardo replied after a moment. He had already decided to do what he could to help Jim, but he knew he couldn't care for 11 others. Instead, he breathed a silent prayer for them, began the awkward climb down to the street. Jim was down to his side in a moment. Would you like me to show you another sleeping place, sir? There's lots more. No, I've seen enough, Bernardo said. Deep inside, he could hear the Lord speaking to him. You must help these boys. He wanted to say, Yes, Lord, but what could he do? He was just a medical student with no experience in these things and no money to help. But there and then he did resolve to help, to trust God to show him how. From that single decision grew a ministry that helped tens of thousands of homeless children, brought many to faith in Christ, and even changed the laws of the British government. But who was this Thomas Bernardo, and what led him to the slums of London in the first place? And that's the end of chapter 1.